It's August 4th, 1985, in Oakland, New Jersey. Roughly 2,000 Jamaicans have gathered for a summer picnic. Families, friends, music, food. A normal weekend outing. Then the shooting starts. Elements of the Shower Posse and Spangler Posse from Brooklyn and the Bronx opened fire on members of the Boston-based Dog Posse and the Tel Aviv Posse. When the smoke cleared, 3 people were dead, 9 were wounded, and police recovered 33 handguns from the scene. 33. At a family picnic. For most Americans watching the evening news that night, this was the first time they'd ever heard the word posse used outside of a Western film. But for federal agents who had been tracking these groups for years, this was just another day at the office. Because by 1985, Jamaican drug gangs had already infiltrated more than a dozen American cities, and the violence was only getting started. This is the story of how gangs born in the slums of Kingston, Jamaica, took over the American crack cocaine market, left over 1,000 bodies in their wake, and became what the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms called the country's most violent criminal organizations. If you're into organized crime content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We cover stories like this every single week. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into it. To understand how Jamaican Posses ended up terrorizing American neighborhoods, you have to understand what they were running from. And what they were running from was a country tearing itself apart. Jamaica gained independence from Britain in 1962, and almost immediately, the island's 2 major political parties turned their poorest neighborhoods into armed battlegrounds. The Jamaica Labour Party, led by Edward Seager, and the People's National Party, led by Michael Manley, built what became known as garrison constituencies. These were entire neighborhoods whose residents were loyal to one party and one party only. The parties armed young men in these communities to serve as enforcers, to intimidate rival voters, to protect their turf. These enforcers were the original posses. The word posse itself came from Hollywood Western films, which were wildly popular in Kingston's slums. Young Jamaican men watched cowboys ride through town with guns, enforcing their own brand of justice, and they identified with it. They named their gangs after neighborhoods. Shower Posse from Tivoli Gardens, Spangler Posse from the PNP garrisons nearby, Dog Posse, Tel Aviv Posse, Renker's Posse. More than 40 different posses eventually operated across Jamaica and the United States. The violence between these political gangs reached a peak during the 1980 Jamaican general election, one of the bloodiest democratic exercises in the Western Hemisphere. An estimated 800 people were killed and nearly 20,000 were burned out of their homes during the campaign. Edward Seager's JLP won that election with the help of the United States, which viewed Manley's PNP as too close to Fidel Castro's Cuba. But Seager's victory came with a cost. In exchange for American support, his government launched a campaign to eradicate marijuana farms across Jamaica. Ganja was one of the island's biggest cash crops. Destroying it devastated rural communities and forced traffickers to pivot. Men like Lester Lloyd Coke, who went by the street name Jim Brown, looked at the cocaine flowing north from Colombia and saw an opportunity. Jamaica sat perfectly between Colombia's Atlantic coast and South Florida. It was an ideal transshipment point, And just like that, the posses went from political enforcers to international drug traffickers. Coke was the muscle. Born and raised in the Tivoli Gardens garrison, he became the neighborhood's strongman after the previous Don, Claudius Massop, was killed in a police shootout in 1979. Coke was feared across Kingston. He was linked to the shooting of Bob Marley in 1976. He ran the Shower Posse's operations in Jamaica with an iron fist, using drug profits to build community centers, hand out money to the poor, and buy loyalty that ran deeper than any political party. But it was Vivian Blake who turned the Shower Posse into an American empire. Blake was different from the gunman back home. He was a strategist, not a triggerman. Born in West Kingston, he attended a private high school on scholarship before moving to New York City in 1973. He started small, distributing marijuana and cocaine in Brooklyn. But Blake recognized something the street-level dealers didn't. The American drug market was massive, poorly organized in many cities, and wide open for anyone willing to be ruthless enough to take it. When crack cocaine exploded onto American streets in the mid-1980s, Blake was ready. He established Shower Posse cells in Miami, New York City, Kansas City, Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and cities as far away as Anchorage, Alaska. The gang's business model was vertically integrated. They purchased cocaine in bulk from Colombian wholesale dealers in South Florida, processed it into crack, and distributed it at the retail level through their own network of crack houses and street dealers. By keeping the entire supply chain in-house, the posses maximized profits while minimizing the number of outsiders who could betray them. And betray them. That was a death sentence. Posse members had known each other since childhood. Many were from the same block in Kingston, bound together by years of shared violence and survival. Federal agents compared this bond to the Italian mafia's code of silence, but said the Jamaicans took it even further. Members used multiple aliases, moved constantly between cities, carried fake identification, and were nearly impossible for law enforcement to track. An ATF report noted that 75% of arrested posse members were in the country illegally. The violence was unlike anything American law enforcement had seen. Between 1985 and 1989, the ATF attributed roughly 1,000 murders to Jamaican posses across the United States. Federal authorities later raised the Shower Posse's body count alone to over 1,400 killings. These weren't quiet assassinations. The Shower Posse got its name, according to one veteran member, from the practice of showering their enemies with gunfire. MAC-10s, Uzi submachine guns, AK-47s, public shootings in broad daylight. ATFD Director Stephen Higgins called them the country's most violent gangs in 1987. James Brown, a special agent in the ATF's Miami office, described their approach even more bluntly, saying he'd never seen a group demonstrate such a total disregard for human life. And they weren't just fighting other Jamaicans. The posse's expansion brought them into direct conflict with African American drug organizations already established in cities like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Dallas. When the Shower Posse moved into a new city, they didn't negotiate. An ATF agent named Joe Vince described their method simply. When Jamaican posses arrive in a city, they tell the people already running the drug market that they're taking over. If those people don't agree, the gang eliminates them. In Philadelphia, the Shower Posse fought a vicious drug war with the junior black mafia throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s. In Washington, D.C., Jamaican dealers from Brooklyn established crack operations in southeast neighborhoods, triggering a wave of killings. In one case, 2 young Jamaican cousins from New York were found executed. One was shot in the head and left in a burning car. The other was shot 3 times and dumped 12 miles away. Police believed they tried to sell drugs in territory claimed by another Jamaican crew. By 1989, federal authorities estimated that Posses comprised 10,000 to 20,000 members and associates, operating through approximately 40 gangs in 15 metropolitan areas. They controlled an estimated 35 to 40% of the entire American crack cocaine market. For a group that most Americans had never heard of, that is a staggering number. Real quick, if you're finding this story as insane as I think it is, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. We put a lot of work into researching these deep dives, and your support helps us keep making them. Drop a comment too. Let me know if you've heard of the Shower Posse before, or if this is completely new to you. Now, back to the story. Because the fall of the Shower Posse was just as dramatic as its rise, in September 1988, a federal grand jury in Miami indicted 34 members of the Shower Posse on 62 counts, including racketeering, drug trafficking, and multiple murders. Both Lester Coke and Vivian Blake were named. Blake's 2 half-brothers, Errol Hussing and Tony Bruce, who ran the Shower Posse's New York operations, were also indicted. But both Coke and Blake escaped the net. Blake fled the country on a cruise ship, slipping back into Jamaica, where he disappeared for years. Coke remained in Kingston, where his political connections kept him protected, at least for a while. Then came the informant who cracked the organization wide open. Charles Little Nut Miller, a Shower Posse member charged with drug trafficking in 1989, agreed to testify against the gang's leadership in exchange for immunity. His testimony was explosive. Miller implicated himself in 9 murders and revealed the Shower Posse's deep connections to the Jamaica Labour Party. He even claimed the CIA had trained him, stating bluntly that the United States made him what he was. Miller later escaped witness protection, moved back to his native St. Kitts, and allegedly attempted to overthrow the local government. That's how deep this world ran. Back in Jamaica, the walls were closing in on Jim Brown. Arrested and jailed, while fighting extradition to the United States, Coke seemed destined for an American courtroom. But he never made it. On February the 23rd, 1992, the same day his eldest son, Yardie, was being buried after being gunned down on a motorcycle in Kingston, a fire erupted in Coke's prison cell at the Tower Street Adult Correctional Center. He suffocated and died. The cell was made of concrete. There were no flammable materials inside. His lawyer said it plainly afterwards. If you believe Jim Brown just burned to death by accident, you'll believe in the Tooth Fairy. His funeral procession numbered in the tens of thousands. Edward Seeger himself marched alongside the casket. Vivian Blake's story ended differently, but not much better. He was finally arrested in Jamaica in 1994 after making the island's most wanted list. He fought extradition for 5 years appealing all the way to the British Privy Council, which rejected his case in 1999. Extradited to the United States, Blake pleaded guilty to racketeering, conspiracy, and cocaine possession. He was sentenced to 28 years, but because his crimes occurred before modern sentencing guidelines took effect, he served only 8. He was paroled and deported back to Jamaica in January 2009. He died of a heart attack in a Kingston hospital on March the 21st, 2010, at the age of 53. Broward Sheriff Al Lamberti, who once served on the task force that investigated Blake, summed up the difference between the Jamaicans and the Italian mafia in one line. With the mafia, it was .22 behind the ear. With the shower posse, it was indiscriminate shooting with machine guns. But the shower posse didn't die with its founders. After Jim Brown's death, his adopted son, Christopher Koch, known as Dudus or the President, took control of Tivoli Gardens and inherited the family business. For nearly 2 decades, Dudus ran the shower posse's operations, maintaining a drug trafficking network that shipped cocaine and marijuana to the United States while importing firearms back to Jamaica. Within Tivoli Gardens, he operated as an absolute ruler. Anyone who crossed him faced brutal punishment. Court documents later revealed that one person accused of theft was detained and killed with a chainsaw. In 2009, the United States demanded his extradition. Jamaica's Prime Minister Bruce Golding, whose constituency included Tivoli Gardens, initially resisted. This sparked a political crisis that exposed just how deeply intertwined Jamaica's politicians and gang leaders had become. When the government finally issued an arrest warrant in May 2010, Tivoli Gardens erupted. Koch's supporters barricaded streets and fought security forces in a siege that required the largest military mobilization in Jamaican history. Over 70 people died. Koch was eventually captured in June 2010, disguised in a woman's wig at a police checkpoint outside Kingston. He was extradited to New York, where he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. The Dudus affair didn't end the Jamaican posses. It fractured them. Where there was once a centralized hierarchy under a single don, there are now smaller, more independent cells operating below the radar. They've adapted. The trafficking routes between Jamaica and the United States remain active. The guns still flow south. The drugs still flow north. The Department of Justice continues to list Jamaican transnational criminal organizations among the most significant threats to American communities. From the garrison slums of Kingston to the crack houses of Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Kansas City, and beyond, Jamaican posses rewrote the rules of organized crime in America. They weren't businessmen in suits like the Italian mafia. They weren't neighborhood crews that grew up selling dime bags on the corner. They were soldiers from a country that had been at war with itself for decades, and they brought that war to American streets with a level of violence that federal agents are still talking about 40 years later. If this story shocked you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got more deep dives into organized crime coming very soon, and I promise you, the next one is just as wild. I'll see you in the next video.